Hey, this is the franchise Shane Douglas, former ECW World Heavyweight Champion in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the city we made famous. What are you watching? Right here on Hannibal TV, episode number 2 of the franchise. So many questions by Hannibal, there's only one place to get it. Right here, Hannibal TV, don't miss it, or you'll get your ass franchised.
This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and one of my most popular shoot interviews was one I conducted in this city, Philadelphia, a few years ago with former ECW World Champion, the franchise Shane Douglas, who was also in WWE, WCW, you name it. He's been everywhere. He's had quite a drive tonight. It's almost midnight. If it's not already midnight, I'm not sure. Yeah. So thank you for being a trooper and still doing this.
Appreciate you waiting for me, Jesus. Yeah, damn construction vehicles on the Pennsylvania back roads. A lot of fun.
And you have personal stuff that we won't get into, but you've been going through hell right now with some other stuff too. So yeah, you're a trooper for sure. But there's something topical that I'll ask you about now, because I know you've had experiences with Jim Cornette, and you also have experiences with the NWA.
Yeah,
that's been well documented. Yeah. People can look it up in our last interview, your situation with the title belt. But that's been in the news this week. I'm sure you've heard the story. I guess he was forced to resign due to failing to apologize because of a joke that was left in the taped episode, which I guess had been in the can for a few months.
Yeah. It's, for me, like when I first heard the story, I don't pay like day-to-day attention to the business. So when I first heard the story, I assumed that it was a live show, and I thought, well, it's a really bad thing to say. It's in the guise of like the breadth of the business being from the times we were in it back then to today. The world's a exponentially different place than it was back in the 1980s. Things you could say then that were normal, are no longer acceptable. And, Jim's a pretty bright guy. So I'm sure he's aware that saying something like that in today's day and age is probably not the best thing to do. That said, like I said, I thought it was a live show. When I found out it had been taped in September and still made air, that now to me takes the responsibility off of Corny and puts it on whoever was doing the post-editing, post-production. In TNA, we had, I think it was 7 layers built in to make sure that something didn't make air, something seen, something said. When I watched the first episode of NWA, first of all, I was impressed by the look of it. It did look like the old 10th and Techwood studio. Cornette's commentary is going to be great all the time, right? Cornette certainly knows what he's talking about and can give it a real pizzazz because he's such a character. But in that very first episode, I heard, I think, 2 or 3 spots being called in the ring. Now that's a simple edit fix, just sanitize that portion of the audio out, easy enough to segment together. So that seemed odd to me. Somebody's clearly not doing their job on the post-editing. And if that was in the can, I'm sure that they all got a chuckle out of the comment like anybody else watching it did. And today, just like a little soapbox side editorial here, today, as long as somebody says, I am pissed off, I'm outraged at something you said, Hannibal, then suddenly that brings all the negative connotation to you because I say I'm outraged. My generation was brought up with the old sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I just think that we're getting to a point now, and this is not a defense of what Jim said. I'm just putting it in context for everybody. What he said was out of bounds by 2019 standards. Would have been a very easy fix for somebody in the editing bay to sanitize that out. If it were live, I think in my book there'd be a lot more heat on Jim because it was live and he should know better. But that to me takes the responsibility off Corny and puts it on whoever was in the editing bay that allowed that to make air.
Supposedly, according to the Wrestling Observer, it was a guy named David Lagana, and he said it was an oversight.
Yeah, a bad one. Today again, I hate to say it like this because the world has changed so much, but those are the types of things you can see from this incident. You can't let something like that slip. I mean, human error can happen here and there, but I think any sentient professional listening to that before they let it make air would say, oh, at very least, hey, Hannibal, what do you think about this? Do you think we should leave this in or take it out? Not just, we'll just let it go. I think it's simple enough because, again, from where wrestling, I remember when I was first breaking into wrestling, and when I was growing up watching wrestling, by today's standards, a lot of really out of bounds stuff. I remember one segment with Morocco and Grand Wizard. They were wrestling Rocky Johnson, sweeping a broom and talking about fried chicken and stuff like that. Completely out of bounds by today's standards. But that's where the business was and where it comes from. So someone like Cornette, who's been in pretty much since then, you could see how easy it would be for him to let something like that get slipped in as he's doing the commentary, because any of us would think, well, if it's too much, if it's not an acceptable comment, they can edit it out afterwards. So I think if the Wrestling Observer is correct and it was Dave Lagana, then the heat should all be on him.
Do you think this is going to be a big loss to the NWA? Because as far as I'm aware, I think Jim Cornette is the only person that had any ties to or maybe the Rock and Roll Express as a tag team, but Jim Cornette was the commentator.
Yeah, and look, he's a great color commentator, right? I mean, you put a microphone and a camera in front of Cornette, he can go. But because he is that direct DNA connection back to Crockett Promotions and the NWA and that whole 10th and Techwood studio look, I'm not sure, and this is by no means taking anything off any of the wrestlers or whatever, I would think that some large number of the fans that are tuning in to watch it on YouTube are doing so because of that connection in Jim Cornette and the character that he brings. See, I think it's a huge loss for them. I wouldn't be surprised if once this sort of like blows down a little bit, if they would try to bring him back. But knowing Corny like I know him, I doubt that Cornette would go back. It seems to me, and again, I'm just going by, I've not read or seen anything, just going by questions like yours.
He apologized today, I guess. He apologized specifically to the people that were offended by it, but he also brought up the same thing you brought up for the people that just dumped on him because they hated him or joined the mob. He didn't apologize to them.
Yeah, so. Well, and that makes sense, right? I mean, it's, again, the feigned outrage thing, I think has gotten to be a little bit far, and the boycotting side, because ultimately what happens, the way this mechanism should work is the market forces will bear this out. So if Shane Douglas or Hannibal are watching the NWA and they say something that pisses us off, we have every right to say, you know what, I'm not tuning in again. I don't care what matches they're offering. I'm done with the NWA. The market will fix that. They'll correct it. So what damage have they self-inflicted on themselves as they're trying to get this new company up and rolling? But again, the guy that is the connection to the NWA that was there and a damn good color commentator now gone, it's got to have a big impact on them.
And what are your thoughts on the NXT versus AEW war?
Well, there's definitely something going on there, right? I sort of dug into it more like from the numbers game. Again, without boring everybody, because I talk about these numbers so much, the massive audience that used to watch back in the 90s that's left, there's a large group of ready-made fans that are sitting there dying and waiting for something different. Like the old saying goes, you only get one chance to make that first introduction. So, the AEW did a great job of the build-up for that first episode. There was a lot of inertia put into it, and a lot of buzz between the fans. Hey, did you hear what this Wednesday night? And they get there and they put it on, and the show. There was a few instances, but by and large, if you just sanitize certain things out, the banners and that kind of thing, I think you'd be hard pressed to tell if you're watching NXT or AEW. The products are incredibly similar. Cody Rhodes is phenomenal with his promos. Got a great head on his shoulders. I mean, he had a great dad teach him right with the American Dream. I'm a big fan of what Jericho's doing. I think he's doing a phenomenal job as the heel. He should. He's got a lot of experience and he's been around the ball game for a while. To me, the big problem for AEW is ours is a business of, at 253, the biggest of my career, I was the short, small guy in the dressing room. I mean, and by a large margin, land of the giants. Theirs being, the vast majority sub 200 and incredibly athletic and all that. I don't think the fans that they need to attract back are going to be interested that you or I can do 26 backflips or 0 backflips. They want to see the holds in the wrestling, the character development, and that's where I think they've got a real chore ahead of them. They got to grow the size of the company, the dressing room, and the things that the kids need to learn. As you know, you've been in the ring. Sanitizing bad habits out is a very difficult thing to do. If you have a bad habit of, like, for instance, one of my bad habits used to be in the corner, my arms on the top rope while I'm, sort of resting. You can tell yourself a million times before the match, don't do that. But when you get in the ring, your body just sort of does it because of the way you've always done it. So these kids who are jaw-droppingly athletic, they're so used to and set in their ways. Those are bad habits. They're ingrained. To sanitize those out takes time. It takes somebody making the direction to point that out. And like when I was a kid at that age, part of it for me was terrified of the veterans in the dressing room. If Bill Watts came to you and said, hey, don't do that anymore, and you went back and continued to do it, it wasn't like, hey, didn't I tell you not to do that? It was like, rah, 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 screaming in your face and throwing you to the wall. They don't have it. I'm not advocating that's what should be done, but it's almost impossible to sanitize bad habits out. A lot of those kids have a lot of bad habits. The character development is going to be something else that they have to work on. Jericho stands out glaringly because he's so good in comparison. He'd be good with no matter who was there, but he stands out because compared to everybody else that's there, he looks like the pro among the same as Cody because they're so good at what they do. Will they be able to bring that group up en masse? They have to grow the size of the locker room. They have to break those bad habits. They have to begin character development. And no matter how much they want to believe they don't have to, they've got to bring some more wrestling back into it. The acrobatics is fine for the segment. They've got that audience. If you look at the numbers breaking down between AEW and NXT, it's sort of like, this is the group. This part is watching them, this part's watching the other one, and it may slide a little bit this way, but they're not expanding that number. If you go back and look at the ratings, first week excluded because of the AEW numbers, they're roughly the same numbers each week, just a few butt this way or butt that way. They got to grow the audience.
Do you think it was a wise move by WWE this week to kind of oversaturate NXT with all the main roster stuff?
Well, they've been doing that, right? The last couple of weeks, bringing back, starting with Finn Balor. Smart in one respect, especially because Finn had made his name there, cut his teeth there. But it makes me start to wonder, like, where does the brand separation then come? If you're starting to bring the SmackDown and the Raw guys down to NXT, well, what's going to happen when they're not there? And if it's just going to every week just be anybody can be at whatever show, then I think Fox would have some concern over that with the money that they've invested into SmackDown and NBC Universal as well. So I don't know if they can continue to do that. And if they do, then the question becomes, will anybody care about these young kids that are in NXT as all these big stars or big names are coming in from the other shows? It's a precarious job, but you can see clearly Vince is trying to pull those ratings back to at least get a win over AEW, and would they come up still 20,000 short? So
they did win actually.
Did they this week? So yeah, I didn't hear the latest.
Win. They really loaded it up. I didn't watch it, but from what I understand, it was numerous stars, and it was less than 100,000 margin, and they didn't win in the rating. They won by people, but the demographic. The demographic, yeah. They lost in the demographics.
Wow. So interesting. I'm going to take a look at those. I didn't know the ratings had come out on that. I've been so busy with the family stuff, but I'll have to check it out and see what's going on. But it's interesting that they're obviously if Vince is putting all those big names on there, he's clearly interested in winning that head-to-head battle.
And I didn't get into this too much last time. We're going to kind of be all over the place with these questions, just some of the topics we missed during the last interview. One of the guys that you mentioned that you wrestled a lot in your WWE days was Haku.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on your matches with him? We've been using him up in Canada lately.
He's great. I just saw him wrestle 2 weeks ago. He was in a tag team match. And I wrestled him about 7 or 8 months ago down in West Virginia. It brought back such good memories to me because when I went up there in 1990, the first, especially when you're at that stage of your career, I was still a young guy, going to the WWF. You walk in and there's all these stars that you've seen and grown up watching on television. And, I luckily got put with Haku. It's an intimidating place, dressing room to walk in the first place, the first time anyway. And early on in my run there, I went to like the Brawler and, some of the underneath guys for a while. But then when they put me with Haku, I was a little intimidated. I didn't really know him yet. And the stories in the dressing room were renowned already about what a tough guy he was and is. And I remember that we were Madison Square Garden, and I used to do the blind turnaround crossbody, and he shot me, and it's called crossbody, so he shoots me in, and I grab the second turnbuckle on the top rope, and I look back over my shoulder, and he's all the way back in the other turnbuckle, and I'm like, I know I can't make that far, and but I'm already in the process of doing the move, so I throw myself as far as I can, and I look back and I see him, like in slow motion. He stops. He goes, and his hands. I remember his hands going like this, running with this look on his face, full bore at me. And he jumps and throws himself into me, and actually carried me like another 3 or 4 feet up into the air. I was probably 230 at the time, and it was like getting hit by a car. Working with Haku was phenomenal because he had such legitimacy. I keep saying past tense, he has such legitimacy, but he taught you at the same time. He got his heat, got himself in, like the saying in the business, make him before you take him, right? And Haku was exceptional at that. And, when people talk about, you go through the pantheon of the great names, right? Who's the greats of this generation and that generation? Haku's name rarely gets thrown in there, always with the tough guy comments. I thought Haku was and is a hell of a wrestler. I thought he was damn good at what he did.
I did an interview with Al Perez earlier this year. I think he would have been in WWE possibly around the same time.
Yeah.
He was another guy that kind of had a lot of potential, didn't quite meet his potential. He had some heat with a guy like Flair as well, similar to you.
Yeah.
Just wondering what your thoughts are on him.
Yeah, Al, he was one of those guys that had the look, right? I mean, it was, aside from the physicality part of it, he also had those movie star looks, right? He was a really good looking guy, and it was built well, was athletic as hell. And as I remember, because it was not a very long overlap there, but I remember coming in, and you could see like there was a bit of a tension there. When the guys walk in and out of the dressing room, I always got along great with Al. It was always fine around me, and just seemed like one of the boys. But I'd always heard, since then especially, that this one didn't like him, that one didn't like him. And what I found is, as I've gotten older in the business, is you see a guy like that walking in the dressing room, right? A young stud that looks, almost pretty, so good looking, has the build, the athleticism. You could see how some of those older guys up in the card might be going, ooh, this guy might be a threat to us. I don't think at that stage I ever was seen that way because I was such a smaller guy comparatively to the other guys. But Al came in there and had good chunky build, good thick build, muscular, cut, lean, and had those movie star looks. He was always a little bit jealous of him, because boy, he's really got everything in the package.
Yeah, he was mentioning that. I don't know if anyone could collaborate this or not, but he said that Pat Patterson actually liked him a bit too, and he said that due to some uncomfortable situations around Pat, he feels that was partly why he didn't last too long.
That could have done it. Yeah, that could have done it. I've often talked about the story of Jim Powers. Jim, really good guy, same thing, good-looking guy, great build, very athletic. We were traveling together and working out together, and we were supposed to get up. We had a TV taping, and then the next morning we were going to get up early and go to the gym. I came downstairs waiting for him and didn't show up for breakfast. I went and called his room, and they said he's checked out. I'm like, what do you mean he's checked out? I thought about like another room or something because we're in the middle of a tour. And they said, no, he's checked out. And I tried calling. This is before cell phones. This is 1990. So it was several months later, and he never saw him again on the road. And a couple months later, we connected up and talked, and he told me, and at the time I had no way to corroborate the story other than what he was telling me. I didn't know him to be a bullshitter. He said that after the taping that night, I think they were getting ready to put the belts on he and Roma as the Stallions. And he got a phone call, he said, around midnight. I can remember it was the 11th floor. He said that he got a phone call around midnight with a voice whispering, said that if you like your spot and you value it, want to keep it, go up to the 11th floor, room 11 whatever, that the door would be open and the lights turned out, said go and lay on the bed, someone will come in and service you. Well, he figured it was a rib and just hung the phone up and went to bed. That early the next morning gets a phone call and was sent home, and that was the last time he worked for them. So again, I can't corroborate the story other than that's what Jim told me. There were a lot of strange things like that went on up there.
Yeah, because I always heard Jim Power's name thrown in there with Steve Lombardi in relation to that, but this is the first story I've actually heard about a direct situation from Jim. Yeah. So maybe one day I'll talk to him in person, but he doesn't make a live appearance.
Yeah, I saw him at the Legends of the Ring last year, and that was the first time since then that I'd actually been in a building with him. So you're right, he's a rare bird around.
And Brian Pillman is a guy that you had a number of matches with over your career. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, Brian was the first night we met Brian. Jim Ross came to Johnny Ace and I. We were in West Palm Beach, Florida, and said now I had heard Brian's name, because as you're coming up in the business, the rookies of the year that year was, I think Brian Pillman was the one that won that year. Steve Cox, my name was in there. So there was always this connection of our names being thrown in together, but I'd never met him. And Jim Ross came and said, there's a kid coming in from Canada, his name's Brian Pillman, and can he jump in with you guys? So we said, sure. And we got to the TV that night. It was a TV tape. It must have been a TV taping. And went back to the hotel. We were going to go over to the Dollhouse, and I think it's called the Dollhouse in West Palm Beach. We got a cab, and we get in the cab, and he starts making some really overtly rude comments to the taxi driver. And at first I think he was trying to impress me and Johnny. I would come to find out later that was just Brian's personality. That was Brian's way of just sort of meandering through the world. I finally said, whispered to him, hey, kayfabe, this guy could shoot. From midnight, this guy could shoot us and say we tried to rob him or something. But Brian, looking at Brian's whole life story, and that most fans are familiar with it. Throat cancer when he was an infant, was always on the smaller side, but over excelled. Somebody I'm sure along the way told him he'd never play in the NFL. Well, he would prove him wrong. Same thing with wrestling, he'd prove him wrong. And I think that pretty much summarizes Brian's life. There was always these hurdles put in front of him, comments made, people, you can't be that because, and he took that as I'll show you. I found him as a talent to be amazing to work with. We'd had a singles match when we were kids in the NWA, but later in ECW when he came in as the loose cannon, I had already been that heel there in ECW. And, Brian never spoke to before, hey, let's go out and do this or that. It was, let's just go out and wing it, because then it becomes more natural, the flow back and forth. If you know your character and I know my character, we don't need to pre-plan lines or, where you're going to stand or I'll be standing. And we got into it out there at ringside, and he wanted me to grab it. So I grabbed the chair, and in ECW, you grab the chair, you swung it. You didn't play around with those things. And I start to swing this chair, and he reaches behind him and grabs an infant, a baby in the front row, and puts the baby in front. I'm swinging the chair full blast. Almost, I would have killed the kids, And I said to him after, what the fuck? And he goes, it worked, didn't it? I said, well, thank God I didn't kill the kid. That was Brian. He was always pushing that envelope, but you go back and you watch that footage, and you can't turn away from it. He was so magnetic to watch because of that pushing the envelope. You know, the person, unless he was different with other people than he was with me, you never quite knew what Brian was going to do or say out there in front of camera, as long as you were ready to bounce off of it and play off of it. I think the business, like the stuff we talked about earlier with AEW, a lot of those kids could learn an awful lot by watching someone like a Brian Pillman. It was just amazingly magnetic to watch.
And that just reminds me that NXT, supposedly they do a full practice on the Tuesday, and like a moment like that can't be practiced because
no,
it's spur of the moment and real.
Right.
Your reaction is real too.
Yeah, absolutely. It had to be.
Yeah.
And you know, if you know, I every time I do a seminar, I tell kids this, and I explain ad nauseum, part to the point of boredom, as to why you shouldn't pre-plan everything. We've all been in the dressing rooms, and what are the kids? We lock up. You do this, and I'll take this, and then you do this, and they lay literally everything out. And so what I watch when I'm watching kids in the ring today is, again, just slack jawed at the athleticism, but they look like kids trying to remember what's coming next, as opposed to just going out there and being that character, which to me was always the fun part. You know, especially as the heel, to be able to go out there and pick somebody out in that audience, or just go at it with them and have that back and forth that, like you said, makes it real and believable.
And you brought this up in your last interview, but no one's ever actually told me the full story of it, this XWF ECW fight that took place at the pay-per-view. I've never heard what actually happened.
Well, I wasn't there. I've heard the full story from Francine. I, of course, heard it at the time, and this was before I had gone into XPW.
Yeah,
and
XPW.
Yeah, this was before I went in there. Sometime before I went in there, but after I had left ECW, I think I was in WCW at the time, and you know, the dressing room is, you know, telephone, telegraph, tele-wrestler. We had heard about it almost probably within an hour of it actually happening. Francine was in the ring doing a promo, and they were all sitting at ringside. Ronnie Lang from Atlas Security had already talked to them, and you know, there was no heat or anything. They were there just paying customers. And at a certain point, one of them jumped up, and I forget who, but one of them jumped up and took their shirt off, which signified to the others to all do the same thing, sitting front row with their XPW shirts. And there was some contact made with Francine, which is what brought everybody out of the ECW dressing room. You know, when God, it was, you know, how many times it happened in ECW if a wrestler would get attacked or touched, and the dressing room would empty out like bees out of a hive. And Franny was in the ring, and I believe somebody either touched her or went to touch her, and that's what instigated it all. It was after all these things all happened. Which happened first? You'd have to ask Franny. But Franny claims there was never any contact. I guess somebody said that Francine hit her back or something. There was a lot of comments made after that. But, you know, it was, hey, look, there's, you know, being the ECW guy, I can tell you that if we were in somebody else's turf, that's what we would have done. You know, we would have gone in, probably bought tickets to the front row of WCW or WWF and done the same thing. So kudos for them for doing it. But, you know, probably not the best dressing room to do it with, because the ECW dressing room was, you know, we were all very protective of the ECW and you know, the characters and such. So, you know, it's I've heard both sides of the story. I heard when I first went there, you know, theirs was a lot more innocuous version. I've heard the way worse versions from other people, and then Francine's story sort of falls somewhere in between. Not a real wise move to make with ECW.
In the end, the only people that I really remember from XPW are the ECW people that crossed over there afterwards, such as you. You gave that one
the speech,
the bill putting the company on your back, but I know there was problems with that company with funding from the beginning.
Yeah.
So.
Well, when I first went there, you know, I made it abundantly clear to Rob Black, the owner, that I didn't want it. I wouldn't be there as long as, if there was any kind of connection between the porno and the wrestling. They had to be two separate companies. And he agreed to do that. And, you know, we went through some incarnation. There were, you know, little issues like, you know, the show wasn't edited the way, you know, I had booked it out or whatever. things like that you come to expect. That's sort of commonplace for the business. But when I found out that they were still crossing over the porno with the wrestling, which was one of the things that I had made very clear to Rob that I wouldn't tolerate. And it had nothing to do with pro or anti-pornography. It was just I didn't want the wrestling fans to have just an easy, it's the porn company, and criticize it just because of that connection. And I still think to this day that was one of the things that they did wrong with XPW. That and not listening, very much like Dixie Carter later, when you have people that are there that have the experience, both in the business, in the ring, and behind the camera, you're a fool not to take that advice, regardless of who it is. Because, like I always tell people, when I take my car to the shop to get fixed and I pay $100, $150 for the mechanic per hour, I don't do that because I like paying the mechanic. I do it because I don't know how to fix it myself. And if I did, I sure as hell wouldn't be paying that. He's the expert. Take the expert's advice.
And speaking of porn and wrestling, I've been equating all this dick grabbing stuff to porn basically lately because like when I was trained for wrestling, that wasn't something that would be acceptable for an employer to ask you as an employee or an independent contractor. Someone's going to grab your genitals or you have to grab someone else. They're now doing it on Impact Wrestling quite regularly, even with Ken Shamrock. What's your thoughts on that gimmick?
Completely against it. And I can already hear before anybody comes on Twitter and says what a hypocrite, because in ECW we pushed the envelope. But and we did some things that probably by today's standards considered tasteless, guilty as charged. But to me, one of the things is like, as I'm watching these spots, the penis, the dick, or whatever you want to call it, is like the character, and so to me, Chris Candido used to love what he called haha, the comedy spots. Excuse me. I tried to shy away from that because my goal as a heel was to get to garner heat with the audience. Chris, I think, did that because he didn't have enough confidence in himself. I think Chris could have been an amazing heel, babyface, whatever it was he wanted to be. He was that good in the ring. But he found it comfortable for him to do the comedy stuff. But if you go back and watch how Chris did the comedy, what he called the ha-ha, it made sense. It fit together. It wasn't like, here, my dick is going to beat you up. Or when you grab my dick, you got to sell. Somebody explained the physics of that to me. It's the same thing with the Invisible Man stuff. And you see that it's getting a reaction from the audience. But my question would be, as soon as one of the kids said, oh, it works, well, does it? Because I remember the business when there was old guys like Buddy Roberts out of shape that could wrestle his ass off, selling arenas out, 17,000 people. The ratings on television through the roof. I alluded to them earlier.
Impact doesn't even release their ratings anymore.
Exactly.
I know they're getting less than 3,000 on Twitch.
See, so I mean, come on. What was the...
They haven't even released their Bound for Glory buy rate, and they did a 5-man dick grab thing on that.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, you're not doing anything. To me, like the same thing back to AEW and NXT from earlier. We talked about this sliding, same group of people just sliding this way or that way. I would guess, and maybe I'm wrong, that Tony Khan, for the millions of dollars he's going to invest in this thing, isn't looking to just keep on fighting over 50 or 100,000 people this way or that way. I'm sure that at some point he envisions AEW becoming this, then this, and then this. That's the kind of stuff that won't do it. Because here's the little secret on it, Tony. I'm going to give you this one for free. If you're going to be successful, you've got to bring back some percentage of the audience that's left. The 48 to 52 million that used to watch in America every week, they've by and large left. They're not going to come back for dick spots, for Invisible Men, or 26 backflips. They're going to come back when they see the wrestling, when they see a character that they believe in, when the storyline compels them to come back. And so until you do that, you're going to be fighting over this 50, 100,000 fans this way or that way. And again, the question I would have then is how long will the Khan family invest in that? If a year from now they're still fighting over that 100,000 viewers, whichever way, will they continue to pay those millions of dollars out to keep the company afloat? That's the big question. Only Tony can answer that.
And Justin Credible recently did a shoot interview with us, and he brought up a story where I guess he had brought Scott Hall to an indie show in Florida.
Yeah.
And you basically told him to leave.
Yeah, it wasn't an indie show. It was Kissimmee. Okay. It was an ECW show. Okay. It was 2 weeks before, I wish I could remember which pay-per-view. It wasn't the Kissimmee pay-per-view, because we would have been there that quickly. But I was in the dressing room, and Tracy Smothers had the ring, all the young guys were in the ring. And just like we always did, the boys were, everyone was milling about the building. And Debbie Beaumont, who was our ticket taker, came in and she said, I don't want to piss you off, but you'll never believe who's walking in the back door right now. Now, this is right after, all this stuff happened in WWE and WWF then. And I said, who? And she said, Scott Hall. Instinctively, I stood up and started taking my pouch off, and Paul Heyman came over and said, you can't hit him. I said, what do you mean I can't hit him? He said, if you hit him, you'll get arrested and you'll miss the pay-per-view. This is a setup. And now I'm really pissed. He's walking around our building. I'm sure he's only going to welcome with a welcome mat. And I said, well, how about if he swings at me? He goes, well, if he swings at you, it's fair game. So there ain't a man on the planet I can't make swing at me, I thought. So Scott, was walking in, and of course you can imagine the entire building went like quiet, right? Boom, all eyeballs were on us.
I didn't realize this was in front of the crowd.
Not fans, the wrestlers. Okay. The ECW wrestlers are everywhere. Everybody stops dead. Tracy's got all the young boy, the Chris Chettys and Danny Dorings and guys in the ring, and he walked in, he turned around and I looked at him and I said, well, you got a lot of balls walking into this building. Because remember, it wasn't just me that he had screwed. He had screwed Bam Bam, he had screwed Candido, Tracy Smothers. There were a lot of guys in that building that he had been involved in screwing. And he looked over and he saw Candido sitting there and he said, hey Chris, hey Tammy, how you guys doing? And Candido stood and said, fuck you, Scott Hall. He kept walking. And Bam Bam was spread out on the bleachers. Hey, about you, Scott? He goes, you and I still boys? And Bam Bam stood up and pulled his tights up and started walking out of the bleachers. And as he did, Scott Hall started backpedaling. And Scott walked up to him and presented us. He goes, you don't have to backpedal for me. He goes, I'm not going to do anything to you. He goes, the franchise is going to kick your fucking ass. He goes, nice to see you come or something like that, and walked away. So now my task is to make Scott take a swing at me. And something like, what can I get him? So I said, I just kept digging at him. He wouldn't say anything. And I said to him finally, and I thought for sure he'd swing on this one. So I was ready to block. I said, I got one question. I said, with all the money you've made there and, all the fame you've had worldwide, I said, exactly what does Vince McMahon's dick taste like anyway? And again, I'm thinking he's going to swing, right? And he stopped and he put his head down, and it was clear he wasn't going to. I just made the direct challenge to him. I said, Scott, you got one choice. This whole building's watching you. I said, you fucked Candido, you fucked Bam Bam, you fucked Tracy, and there were a couple others. I said, and you fucked me. I said, and you think you're going to be welcomed into this building with open arms. I said, this ain't the WWE, and none of us is going to get fired for kicking your ass. And so I said, you got a choice. You can put your hands up and fight like a man, or you can put your tail between your legs and walk the fuck out of here like a pussy. Again, thinking he's going to throw any second. And he looked around for a second, and he put his head down and turned around and walked out. Honest to God, in that split second, I almost felt bad for him. I'm like, man, I've never seen somebody get punked out that badly and not react. But PJ, the reason I'm laughing, I'm telling the story is PJ, I didn't know PJ had invited him. So that I was off base on it. That night, PJ came to my room and he's, crying and profusely apologizing. He bought me a bottle of wine and everything else. And I said, PJ, I apologized back to him. But then I explained to him, I said, you understand on the politics of this, why this wasn't really a great idea, but he was young at the time, and, I've made a lot of dumber mistakes than that in my career, so.
And I know this story involved in the Click. I didn't have time to ask you last time, but since the last time I've talked to you, Carl Ouellet, he's made quite a name for himself in Ring of Honor. He's about to be a free agent again, from what I understand. His contract expires December 1st.
Yeah.
So he might get picked up by AEW, or he might sign to a bigger deal. But you were pretty much a witness to that whole situation that took place with him in Montreal. If you could.
Well, Carl's a great guy. I always got along great with him. I haven't seen him in forever. He's blind in one eye. I believe it's the left eye. Well, anyway, I had been, when we first launched the Dean character, I was like 2 or 3 months just doing vignettes. I wasn't on the road. This was the first loop I'd be on the road. And I was traveling with PJ as Aldo Montoya and Tammy and Chris. And we were staying at the Days Inn by the Montreal airport. We got to the building as we were walking in. When you walked into the old Molson Center, I think it's torn down now, right? It's not. I think it's a different building.
The Forum is torn down. Now it's the Molson Center. It's called the Bell Center, I think, now.
Okay, well, when you walked into the old Forum, I guess it was, there was like the hallway, like sort of, went from the doorway and like went down like in a semicircle. And there were 2 dressing rooms on the left, a little bit, one staggered up higher. And I went to walk into one of those rooms, and Sean grabbed me by the shirt and he said, "No, you don't dress there, you dress with us." So I followed them down past the Zamboni machine. They dressed where the Canadiens dressed. And so I walked in, having no clue about the politics of the place. I was just first on the road. And I opened my bag up, and the dressing room door was here, bench and the lockers and things. And so I opened my bag up, and Sean is standing right here in front of me, and Kevin Nash comes walking over, and Sean asks him, "What are you going to do tonight?" Now, the setup to that whole story was Montreal had been slowly declining, dropping. And Carl, who's from there, pulled in a lot of favors, did a lot of local press, and busted his ass. And Vince had booked him in the main event against Kevin. Well, if you do a clean finish, done. You're not going to draw anything next month or 6 months from now. So,
because they were going to Montreal, I think, 4 times a year at that point or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And so Kevin said to Sean, Vince wants some kind of a hot finish so we can do a return. Sean said, "Fuck what Vince McMahon wants." He said, and again, this took place. It wasn't like I was hearing this like over a cell phone, like the Holmes said with the president the other day. I was watching it and listening to it right in front of me, and he said, "Fuck what Vince McMahon wants." And Kevin started, saying the right thing. He said, "Well, if I beat him clean, I can't really do a return." And Sean, bowed, look it up, because Kevin's so damn big. He said, "Let me ask you a question. When you worked with the champion, did you put the champion over clean here?" And he said, "Well, yeah," but he goes, "No buts." He said, "Fuck what Vince McMahon wants." He said, "Beat this piece of shit." He kept going, jackknife, 1, 2, 3. He kept doing that over and over again. So he turns to walk out, and as Sean's walking out, pulls the door open, Carl's walking in. And it was my first eye-opening thing, because Sean had just been talking shit on Carl, who's a pretty good kid with his hands, pretty tough.
Wouldn't back down.
No, for sure, for damn sure. And opens the door, and he sees, "Hey, Carl, how you doing?" It becomes instant friend, right? So I'm like, well, that's strange. And so he comes walking in. Now Sean looks like he's walking out, whichever side Carl's blind on. Sean walks out the door and then comes right back in, and he's standing behind Carl on his blind side. So now imagine what I'm seeing. Here's Kevin, here's Carl, and right behind Carl is Sean pantomiming to Kevin what to say. So I'm watching this, and Carl says, "So what do you want to do tonight, Kevin?" And he goes, "Well," and meanwhile Sean's behind him going, pantomiming it. So I'm watching this, and I'm what the hell's going on here, And finally, Kevin sheepishly, after several minutes going back and forth, Kevin said, "I don't know, I was thinking maybe just like a jackknife." And Carl goes, "No, we can't do a jackknife. Vince needs a some hot finish." And Sean turns and leaves. So I was going to get a draw. So I walk up to one of the other dressing rooms up above, and I walk in, and Carl, as I was leaving, I heard Carl say, let's go talk to the agent. So they're walking behind me. So I walk into the room waiting to talk to the agent to get my draw, and Sean says, excuse me, everybody, excuse me. Can I have your attention, please? My name's Shawn Michaels. They call me the Heartbreak Kid. He goes, this is Carl Lillet. They call him Pierre. He said, Pierre here has a problem doing a job for a champion tonight. And Carl goes, Sean, what are you talking about? I don't have a problem doing a job. And he goes, no, we already heard what you said. And, now Carl starts to move into, and everybody, of course, starts pulling them apart. So that night after the show,
it was a double DQ or something.
Some crap finish, and we were at the Days Inn. It was the hotel was one of those hotels where, like, literally from my doorway I could reach out and touch the front desk. We were right off the front desk. Me and PJ were in the first room. The second room was Tammy and Chris. So as we're walking in, PJ's already gone into the room. Tammy and Chris have gone in, and I'm getting ready to walk in. The Click walks in, and they're down the other end of the hall from us. So they tapped me on the shoulder. Who did, I can't recall, but one of them tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, we're in room whatever. We ordered pizza and beer. Come on down. We want to talk to you. So now remember, in NWA, I had been traveled with and friends with Scott. In WWF in 1990, me and Sean were close friends, I thought. In fact, Sean and Marty and me and Dustin Rhodes, everybody called us the Four Amigos. So, and I knew Hunter from the NWA a little bit. I didn't really know X-Pac. Knew Kevin a little bit from the NWA. So I had no reason not to go down there. And I walked into the room, and I can remember Kevin was laying on the bed, and everybody else was milling about the room. And they said, what do you think about the shit that happened in the building tonight? I said, what are you talking about? They said, with Carl. I said, well, he made sense. I said, you do a clean job, you can't do a return. And Sean goes, see, I told you, everybody, Shane understands the business. And then he starts to proceed to tell me how things are different in the WWF. And so, I knew enough not to say anything more. I just started listening, and they all started ramping up, like how they could reseat Carl. All because Carl wanted to do what the boss, the guy that owns the company, said they would do. And he was right. You do a clean finish, you're done, no return. So they all started like, we should, do this to him, we should do that to him. Kevin picked the phone up and started dialing the phone. He goes, I know, I'm just going to call Vince and tell him to fire him. And to this day, I can't remember which one did which.
They had that much power back then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this was. My first thought, I think, in hindsight, was they're working me, to make me think they have this much power. And Sean, it was, Hunter stayed out of it, X-Pac stayed out of it, other than a few comments here and there. Either Sean or Scott went over and hung the phone up and said, no, let's think about this for a while. And they started ramping up again, getting stiffer and stiffer. Finally, whichever one didn't hang the phone up, because one did one and the other did the other, said, I got it. Let's call Vince and tell him to starve his fucking ass for 3 years. And I remember thinking to myself, I felt like I was watching a woman being raped. I wanted to get out and go take a shower. It was so disgusting to me. As these guys that are being flown first class, picked up in limousines, making money out the ass, as guys like Carl who are schlepping, and you've been there and done it, driving hundreds of, sometimes thousands of miles, crammed in the middle seat in the back of the plane, making an okay paycheck. And they want to starve this guy who has a family because he wants to do what the boss that owns the company said to do. To this day, it
send
repulses
them to Memphis too, didn't they?
That's right.
And where they were hardly paying people anything.
That's correct. Yeah, right after that. So, yeah, pretty disgusting.
Under the pretense that they would give him a new character there and call him back up, but I don't recall if they ever did.
Yeah,
they went to WCW maybe after.
I look at him on this camera. Carl, we haven't seen each other for a while. When your contract's up, best of luck to you, buddy. I wish you all the best in the world.
And you've mentioned that you traveled with Sonny and Chris Candido. Just Incredible was saying there was an uncomfortable moment once with him when Chris was in the shower of Sonny getting a little...
Really?
Yeah,
wow,
did you ever experience anything like that?
Wow, I plead the fifth on this one. Yeah, Tammy was known. I've heard multiple stories of that kind of stuff going on. I do also know that Chris was head over heels in love with her. Even when he knew that kind of stuff, like the stuff with Shawn Michaels at WWF. I was there that night, and it did happen. To me, I'd be saying kick your ass to the curb. But Chris really did love her, and there was an odd relationship between them, because I think most people put in that situation, having that kind of stuff done to them, would say, "Fuck this, I'm out of here." But the two of them were, I think, well, first of all, they were codependent, and that's always a bad thing. But they had both come up in the business and cut their teeth pretty much in the same places, and had known each other for quite a long time before that. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me what PJ, if PJ said that happened, it wouldn't shock me, and I would never call PJ a liar. If that's what he says, I believe it. In hindsight, I feel bad for Chris that Chris didn't have, I think it goes back, like I said earlier, about Chris not having the self-confidence in himself to be that stone cold heel or heroic babyface, because he was capable of both. I just don't think Chris had a lot of self-confidence in general, and I think with Tammy, he felt very comfortable with that, and so accepted a lot of it.
What was the worst example of what you saw the Clique do to him? Because I know that they really tore... Jim Ross has even said it on his podcast. He considers that they actually tormented Chris Candido.
The worst I can think of is the thing with Shawn. Look, to me, especially then, the business has changed to some degree, I guess. But back then, wrestlers were a spoiled lot. We'd go into, we're making all this money, and you go into a store and people would be giving you, free $200 tennis shoes and stuff. Free upgrades. You go to a restaurant, they wouldn't let you pay because, they want you to come back to the restaurant, things like that. So wrestlers were used to getting, me included, used to getting away with things. You could, if you got in trouble, with the law. Like, I remember one time there was a fight outside the ECW arena, and the cops came, and not one wrestler was questioned. It was all the people from the bar next door that got arrested. So wrestlers are used to getting away with stuff like that, and I think, because of that, it's easy to lose sight of the real world that most people inhabit. But to me, there's a fine line. Screwing with somebody's wife or very close girlfriend, or even if she wants to, that's not the litmus test. The litmus test is you would never in a million years have to worry about if you and I were on the road together doing something like that. And I would hope the same thing, vice versa. So I think there are some things that I don't care, what your position is in the company, what stroke you have with the boss. There's things that you do and there's things that you don't do. And that was just a goddamn asshole move.
And I wasn't going to ask you about this, but this kind of brings it up, this whole Rusev angle with Lashley, where, I don't know, it seems like it'd be I would never be able to put up with my wife doing that, for instance, with a guy that I'm on the road with every day.
Yeah, it's, because, again, we go back and look at it, like for me, I've had a long career to see that, so you see the thing with Kevin and Nancy and Chris, right? And although Kevin has said that, that was all, part of the show and everything, it's got to, on some level, even though, if you split up, at some level, you're going to be looking, going, man, this is like hitting a little raw nerve, Again, there's something, the one thing I've never bought is when somebody comes in and says, well, that's what the angle calls for, So if it calls for me pretending that I'm going to go out and rape your wife or sleep with your wife or stab you in the back and do that kind of, I'd be the first to say, look, I don't really feel comfortable doing that. Now, if you came to me and said, hey, I don't give a shit or whatever, that may be different. But to me, there's things that you do and things that you don't do. Back to Carl. he was exactly 1,000% right on that. If that's what the boss called for, and knowing the acumen of the business, once you get pinned 1, 2, 3, clean in the middle of the ring, nobody wants to pay to come back and see you, hometown guy or not. The same thing with this. There's things that you do and there's things that you don't do. And the reason I say that is because we are only limited by what we can think of in our heads. We don't have to sit there and go, well, let's just go and just do the dumbest down thing. Let's act like 13-year-old juvenile kids. I remember Dixie Carter saying to me one time, maybe we better dumb that down. The audience might not get it. And my thought was, you're so brilliant, you get it. But those schleps out there that pay their greenbacks, they'd never be able to get. They're nowhere near as smart as you. Make them think. Make them work up for it. Even the ones that don't get it will pretend like they do, and they'll go home going, "What did they do? Why did they do that?" Make them think, because if you're thinking about something, you're bought into it. I would dare say not many people were thinking into stuff in TNA back then.
I'd like to see an interview of you interviewing Dixie Carter. That would be entertaining.
Hey, set it up. I'd love to do it.
She seems to have dropped off the surface of the earth in recent years.
Yeah, right. She's she's liable to be at the bottom of a lake someplace if your daughter spent $500 million of yours and had nothing to show for it. But I don't know. It's again, a lot of weird, strange stuff that was going on there, allegedly.
Yeah. Well, I think even Scott Hall was one of the guys throwing that rumor around, although he said he didn't do anything with her.
I did not. I can say that definitively. I did not.
Now, Ahmed Johnson, I'm not sure if you had any contact with him, but he was a guy that, from all reports I heard, didn't really know what he was doing in the ring too well.
Yeah, he was hard in the ring. I see a lot of the kids doing it today. One of the things that I think people, when they're inexperienced in the ring, do is they want to speed up. I think it makes it look more exciting or whatever. And Ahmed would do that, but the thing with Ahmed was he was such a damn strong guy, a big, imposing guy, that he could get downright dangerous. Like he would, like for the power bomb, for instance, where he'd pick you up and throw you. There were times he didn't care if you were in proper placement or not. He would just and throw you. And if you landed on his shoulder, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do it, My generation, I was always trained, if you can't hit it with certainty 100% of the time, you don't do it, you don't attempt it. So there was a lot of that. But I only worked with him a handful of times in WWF then, because I was already, as he was coming in and they were starting to push his build, I was already had given my notice and was on my way out, and so working around the loop with Scott.
And you wrestled CM Punk in TNA, and he's gone on to, I don't know how much of a draw he's been overall, but he's definitely made a lot of money in the business. What was your thoughts on that match and him in general?
Well, that was got way back. I mean, he was still, coming up in the business. I always got along well with Punk. I liked him because you could tell that he was really not in a kiss-ass kind of way, but in a diligent kind of way. He wanted to go out and do well. And, I saw a lot of the same kind of concern that I had as a kid, not wanting to screw up out there, going out and putting on a good match. He listened. He was very respectful, like I would have been to guys whenever I was in that same position. You could tell, not just with that match, but in watching him at that time, you could see that he had something different than most of his peers. Again, like then, just like now, you go into the AEW, NXT dressing room or any independent dressing room, I would say probably 95% of that dressing room can do standing backflips and land on their feet. Impressive. I don't ever remember Bruno doing one. I never remember Hogan doing one or Flair doing one. He always seemed to me as somebody who was trying to set himself apart, something to be different. Whereas today it seems like it's almost like there's a checklist in the back. Okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to wear long tights with some tribal stuff down the side. I'm going to get a little bit of overgrowth and wear some jewelry out and grow a beard. There's nothing that separates, very little that separates wrestler A from B from C. Punk always seemed to me to be different in that vein, that he was always looking for some way to be different. But his recent return, they're like, if what I'm reading is true, again, you always take it with a big grain of salt with all the fake news today, right? But I've heard that he's not signed to WWE. He's signed with Fox, correct?
He's signed to Fox, but from what I've understood from the research I've done on it, WWE had to approve of him being signed because it's a show about WWE. I saw the clip on YouTube of his thing that he did on Fox last week, and they did a whole montage of fans talking about him possibly coming back. But I think the whole thing is he could wrestle for WWE with this deal, but because there'd be a conflict with AEW, this means that he can no longer wrestle for AEW while he's under contract with
Interesting.
Fox.
Well, just a little sidebar with AEW. Remember I said a few minutes ago about AEW, they have to grow the size of their dressing room. They need, to get some seasoned workers in there. It's rare that a CM Punk comes along, right? Somebody that has that brand recognition, the notoriety amongst the fan base. If they didn't offer him enough money, it tells me that, remember what I said about how much money the cons will invest? It tells me that the bean counters have already gotten involved.
Yeah.
Because you get a CM Punk coming along at this crucial moment, right? You've launched your company, you need names, you need some more stars, and a CM Punk comes along that the fans know had a very terse relationship with Vince McMahon, walked out, left the business, had a lawsuit against Vince. That's the kind of stuff that an AEW could have made gold out of, and yet didn't work to sign him.
And he was the last guy that they had that could actually have made a difference like that too.
Correct. So to see him back there doing the commentary, why they would have broken that on an FS1, a show that was being watched by 49,000 people. Now granted, in today's world, we all have these things, right, that we can get on and put it out there. So by the next day, I'm sure a lot more were aware of it.
Supposedly, it didn't make like the top Twitter
really?
though, and it only had 180,000 views this week for his actual debut.
Ooh.
So with Survivor Series being this weekend in Chicago, you're correct. I don't know why they.
And him from Chicago. I mean, they could have. The Booker brain that I have, makes me think, how, all the things you could have done with that, especially with them being in Chicago this week. One of the things that I find myself saying more and more is, if you go back and listen to interviews that I've done over the years, you'd always hear me say, I'll tell you a lot of things about Vince, but I'll never say he's stupid. But as the last year or two, I'm finding myself scratching my head on stuff like that. If you're going to bring a Punk back, at very least, tease it. You won't believe who's going to be back here next week, 2 weeks from now. Oh my God, trust me, your jaw's going to drop when you see this person back. Everybody would guess and whatever, but you'd make some kind of fanfare about it. You wouldn't just say, oh, here on this little show that almost nobody watches, here's this guy named CM Punk back. Just grossly mishandled. So AEW drops the ball by not, signing the guy, and then WWE brings him back in such an inauspicious way that you have to wonder if that's not Vince going, welcome back, CM. It's because it just seems odd the way it was handled.
Supposedly, with this setup, who knows, he could come back like for a Saudi Arabia show if they want to throw the millions of dollars at him, like you've seen.
Could be.
You mentioned TNA and your booking mind. What exactly was your job in TNA? Were you on the booking committee or?
Yeah, I was on the booking committee. Not an effective voice on the booking committee though. It was, in hindsight, it was sort of like a rudderless ship. We'd get into the production meeting, and I remember one time in specifically. AJ Styles was wrestling. I forget who he was wrestling, but the question was who would go to the ring first, AJ or the heel. And Terry Taylor, raised his hand. Terry and I always sat right next to each other. We'd play tic-tac-toe on the paper on the desk. And Terry said, well, why don't we send the heel out first to get some heat and then, hit AJ's music and get a good pop out of it. And Jeff Jarrett looked at the paper like he was pondering, and he goes, no, we'll keep it as it is. And then he said something to Terry. The exact words, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember the exact words, but it was not far from this. No, we're going to keep it like it is. And from now on, why don't you keep your stupid fucking ideas to yourself, Terry? And I remember kicking Terry to the table like, dude, you can't let a man talk to you like that. I don't care if it's your job or not. Like, do something, say something. And so because after that, I thought I wouldn't speak up, because I thought if he says that to me, I'm probably not liable to take it as laid back as Terry did. And it didn't matter anyway. Dixie would come to you I'm sure there's a week or two she missed here or there, but it seemed like every time you saw her, she would have a question for you about the business. What do you think about this segment? And I would look at it and I'd run it through, like knowing where that particular angle had been, where they're planning on it going. And then I'd give my 2 cents and I'd explain the psychology of it. So if you do this, then this is how it's going to be. The fans are going to react to it and I'd explain it out to her. Not one time did she ever take my advice, and not just mine, nobody's. But then 2 weeks later, we'd come back for the next taping, and she would say, "You're right. Everybody's bitching about it online." And everybody online would be 25 people that were talking about it on some blog site somewhere. So you'd give her that, advice, which she wouldn't take. And it was just, like I said, a rudderless ship when you have people that are, you had Terry Taylor, you had Dutch Mantel, you had Vince Russo, you had Jeff Jarrett, you had me, you had, God, who else was there? Through the years, you had
Al Snow,
Mick Foley, Terry Funk. Nobody's advice being taken. And, so you just got to the point where it doesn't matter why say anything anyway, because nobody's going to listen to you anyway. But my title in TNA was Head of Talent Relations. And, my job hands-on with the wrestlers was mostly to work with them. The one thing I primarily focused on was promos. Taking the guys up and I'd say, okay, Hannibal, you're going to be wrestling AJ Styles in the main event of the next pay-per-view, and this is what it was, give me 90 seconds, go. And, we'd film it and watch it back, and, I'd give pointers, here's the strengths, here's the weaknesses, these are the things you need to improve upon. As head of talent relations, my job was pretty much to play liaison between if your contract was coming up or we were trying to get you signed to a contract. Where does things stand? What can I do to prod you along? What can I do to try to pull the company? Although my job was supposedly to advocate for the company, I was also trying to find that place. Like if I knew that, hey, they'll sign you for this and you want this much, hey, go in and ask for this, you'll be fine. Because to me, I didn't see the need for creating animosity. If we sit there and go back and forth for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, now you got a chip on your shoulder because you don't think the place really wants you. And, I'd always seen it from the boys' point of view, but also I've seen it from the company point of view. Anybody that's ever done this side of it knows that this is anything in entertainment is incredibly expensive. Setting up even an office, the computers, the rent, the insurance, the phone lines, the people to staff it, everything gets exponentially expensive. And the wrestlers oftentimes don't understand that part of it. We're sort of spoiled. We show up at a building, we get flown in. Worst we have to do is maybe rent a car. We get to the building, the ring's set up, the people come in and we wrestle and we leave, right? We don't see any of the other stuff that goes on. So I always try to find that happy medium between the two. What's going to make the wrestlers feel most comfortable and ready to go out there and work, and what's going to make the company feel best about hiring, say, a Hannibal or a Shane Douglas. So that's what I did as talent relations. How I got that job, I never asked for it. When Dusty Rhodes came in, he held a team meeting one day, and he was going through, and I was standing over to the side looking at my match I was agenting that night. And he said, where's Shane Douglas? And I walked out and went, here. He goes, Shane Douglas is the new head of talent relations, so anybody's in the contract negotiations, talk with Shane. And I didn't know if he was ribbing me or not. And that's how I ended up getting the job. So I owe Dusty a big, aside from the stuff I learned from him over the years, I also got that first real office position from Dusty Rhodes.
How were your dealings with AJ Styles there? I
loved working with AJ. AJ, it sounded like a pun, right? phenomenal in ring. Really is. A kid that can do anything. But just as a person, especially like when the stories I just said a few minutes ago about the WWF, right? And you start to get familiar with that kind of stuff. And then you meet a guy like AJ who's just a sweetheart guy, just a really good human being. You'd go to him anytime you had a concern. All you had to do is go to him and bring it up, and it was no problem. If everybody was that easy to work with, this would be the greatest job in the world, being involved in the office. Unfortunately, he's the exception to the rule.
Yeah, and even as an independent promoter, I can tell you that's like you deal with more assholes than friendly people in wrestling.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me the other day, why are you dealing with this dickhead? And I'm like, everybody's a dickhead. It's just a matter of what level of a dickhead you are.
Well, and to that end, too, like I was talking to one of my friends that's not in the business, and they were asking me, like, why is everybody like that? And I said, well, if you look at it from the wrestler's point of view, they've gotten lied to and stepped on and stabbed in the back 10 million times. And I think people like Vince engender that. They want it to be that way. So that, when you get a little bit of something thrown at you, you're appreciative of it. And, it's like throwing, you have a room full of starving people, right? You throw a pizza in the middle, watch everybody fight over the pizza. I think that's what the guys like Vince McMahon do, is they want to engender that so that you're fighting amongst each other instead of coming to me and asking me for a raise.
And I'm going to ask you some fan questions. There's some fans even at this hour on here watching this. Do you feel that Triple H has taken elements of his promo style from you?
We all steal from each other. But I one time, and this is God years ago, I was still married at the time, and we were watching Raw, and I'd gone into the kitchen to make a sandwich, and I was like half listening but not really paying attention, and I heard something. I stopped and I went, why does that sound familiar? And I walked in around the corner. I'm looking at the TV, and I walk in on him saying, it's my belt, it's my belt, it's my damn belt. That's why it sounds familiar. It's my promo verbatim, word for word. And so yeah, I mean, he's obviously taking stuff, but again, we all steal from each other. It's the franchise character, as much as I'd love to say I created that in my mind and it's all my doing, it's Barry Windham, it's Brad Armstrong, it's Ric Flair, it's Ricky Steamboat, and Terry Funk, with a little bit of like Bruno and Dominic thrown into a blender, with a whole lot of Troy Martin thrown in there. So instead of stealing, I'd say probably more homage, because again, we all take from each other. And there's like Scott Irwin told me long time ago, don't try to do anything original because it's all been done. So if I've taken parts of my promo style from Ric Flair and other people, and I'm sure he's borrowed as well. But I've never taken anybody's verbatim.
Have you ever worked with Owen Hart, and if so, is he the sweetheart everyone says he is? Some fan is asking.
Yeah, I never worked with Owen, never got the chance, was never that lucky. Owen was one of those guys, like I talked about Chris Candido, that it just came easy to him. At least he made it look easy. But Owen was one of those guys that had such a sense of humor, that he'd be saying something, you'd be thinking it's just a conversation, and meanwhile he's hitting you with a zinger. One time we were in Germany, he was wrestling Davey Boy Smith. I think it was Germany. Anyway, he flying mared Davey Boy and puts him in a headlock, and from the back all you could see is like, without my glass I could just see like certain generalities. And I see him taking down, he goes like that to Davey Boy, and Davey Boy starts spitting, does it again, and this goes on like 4 or 5, 6 times. And what the hell is he doing out there? He just keeps wiping his hand across his face. What the hell is he doing? Davey Boy comes back and he's got this beard of shit all over his face. There's coffee grounds and bananas and like grounded bananas and God knows whatever else was there. And I'm thinking like, what? He had it somewhere in his tights, and when he built it, he kept wiping different shit on Davey Boy's face. He was funny. He was one of those guys that, you had to really pay attention. When we were in Germany, I've talked the story before about Scott Hall and Kevin complaining for the entire ride about the kind of beer that was on the bus. And after about an hour or two of it, it was like a 6-hour drive. I couldn't take it anymore. I was just ready to just, like scream, just shut up about the beer already. And I walked down, and Owen's sitting there, watching the TV, and I sat down next to him and was going, man, what the fuck? I'm just talking to him, right? And he keeps on looking at me going, making different motions back and forth. And I finally asked him a question. He doesn't say anything. And I said, I asked him again, is he sleeping? I look over, he's still watching. And, finally looks at me and he goes, he had earphones in, and the little ones pushed back in. And I was asking, like, how the hell do you put up with that shit? These guys aren't driving you crazy. There's bitching like two ladies, like old ladies in the back there about the beer. And he pulled the earplugs out. I went, oh, that's how he's doing. He's not paying any attention to them, But Owen was, he's a great guy. I never got the pleasure to work with him, though.
Someone's asking you your favorite memory of the Dynamic Dudes.
Signing the contract. That was the first contract that I had ever signed. And, Johnny and I, like I've often said, it wasn't the greatest gimmick in my career. I learned a lot. I learned about tagging basics with Johnny. And, also being pushed up the card a little bit. Instead of being the guy throwing in the card somewhere, we were suddenly a stock that they were trying to push. So there was a lot to be learned about, from those positions. The thing that stands out the most about with Johnny was, we got along great. Traveling together on the road was, it was great. We got along very well. But we had debuted on Music City Showdown, I think it was called, the one where Terry Funk pal drove Flair through the table. We wrestled the Samoan SWAT team with Paulie Dangerously as their manager. And it was, to this day, I can't remember which, and I've been too lazy to look up the name. It was Johnny and Shane, the next generation, or Johnny and Shane, the new generation. Next or new. And the next morning, we get on the shuttle to go to the airport, and Eddie Gilbert, who had a very wry sense of humor, gets in, and he sits down, and he said, well, did you guys hear your new name? And in my head, I'm thinking, well, we've already aired on a pay-per-view last night as Johnny and Shane, the next or new generation. I said, okay, I'll bite. What's the punchline, Eddie? He goes, you're going to be called the Dynamic Dudes. And me and Johnny both started laughing, and Eddie did one of these. And I could tell I knew Eddie well enough at that point that he was being serious. I said, please tell me you're fucking ribbon. He went, and I said, where did that come from? He said, Jim Hurd, the Pizza Hut executive, in his infinite wisdom of professional wrestling, had commissioned a study in California, with the thought being everything starts in California, works eastward. What were the big words that year in California? And the two words that topped the list was dynamic and dude. Like, hey, dude, that's dynamic. And so he put the number 1 and 2 together and came up with the Dynamic Dudes. And the rest, as they say, is infamy. with this town, Philadelphia, me and Johnny, when we flying in there, I used to get like knots in my stomach because they were not the biggest babyface town. They didn't like Johnny and Shane too much.
What are your feelings on Paul Heyman today? I know he probably still owes you a lot of money, even though he's a multimillionaire. He's probably not going to ever pay you back.
He owes a lot of people a lot of money. Look, with Paul, like everything, it's a yin and yang, right? Paul saw something in me that I didn't see even at the time. At that point in my career, 11 years in, I knew that I was a good, solid baby face. I'd just come off the run with Ricky Steamboat. But Paul had seen something in me. Hey, I can't credit Paul with the heel stuff. Eddie Gilbert had come up with that idea long before. Eddie had seen the heel turn. He wanted to turn me and Johnny heels as the dudes. So he had seen, I credit Eddie with that first. But Eddie's idea was, Eddie was a little bit too rooted in Memphis. So he saw me as the fabulous one, like the Fargos, the fabulous one, Shane Douglas. And that's a pretty hard thing, even now, like in hindsight, looking back, a hard thing to direct your focus into. Excuse me, when Eddie left, abruptly, just left and never came back, and Todd put Paul Heyman in charge. He came to me in 1993 was the first year the NFL started signifying one player per team as the franchise player, supposedly the most important player to that team. Paul came to me and said, I've got an idea I want to run by you. I was thinking of calling you the franchise. And he explained the NFL connection and everything. And, so I started thinking about it, and I said, what do you see this character, how do you see it playing out? And he said, well, like he knew Lawrence Taylor, and I knew Mario Lemieux and Dan Marino, and, between the two of us, we could either get to or make connection to a lot of different athletes. He wanted me to go to the ring each night wearing like a Lawrence Taylor jersey, a Mario Lemieux jersey, a Michael Jordan jersey, whatever, signifying that I'm such a franchise athlete that I hobnob with these guys. And I thought about it for a few minutes, and I said, well, wouldn't the franchise expect Michael Jordan and Lemieux and Lawrence Taylor to wear his jersey? And Paul stopped and thought about it, and he went, you get the character. So I give Paul the credit and seeing something in me that I didn't see and didn't have the confidence in myself to carry out. That would be the yin, and the yang side of that would be he owes me a lot of money. So, you get the good with the bad, but that's pretty much how life is. I mean, that's if I still worried about the money that I was owed all those years ago, I'd probably have a heart attack by now. But hey, Paul, if you're on, it's $144,000.
Favorite order at the Penrose Diner? Is that something that I don't know about?
The Penrose Diner, yeah, that's the Penrose Diner is down by the old. No, I didn't eat much diners. I went in there to the Penrose and I got spaghetti and meatballs one time, and the meatballs came loaded up with big chunks of onions and stuff. And my mom never put onions in my meatballs, so I've never been a big Penrose Diner guy.
And the last fan question I'll ask, there's a lot of them on here, surprisingly, even at this time, is what are your thoughts on John Cena?
I've often said John is the Hulk Hogan of his day, right? A huge draw. I'll speak about like his character stuff and then the other stuff as to why I really respect the guy. I can separate, there's the wrestling side of things in our business, then there's the human side of things, the way I see it. I don't think John is ever going to go down as being one of the, you're never going to hear his name thrown around with the Ricky Steamboats and the Ric Flairs of the world, or the Terry Funks. But when I say the Hulk Hogan of the generation, that's not a condescending comment. He is one of the bigger names, if not the biggest name of his generation up to a point, right, until you had the others getting hot, like with The Rock and stuff, but they all came in together. But when you see a guy that, and this is what always impressed me about Hogan, was, when you're in that level, time is very, very valuable. And, they'd come down and they'd have a room full of handicapped kids there to see the Hulkster. And they'd always have a handler with them, and Terry would go around and meet each kid and everything. And within 10 or 15 minutes, the handler would say, okay, kids, Mr. Hogan has to get ready for his match tonight. And if he wasn't done, he would say, I'm not done yet. And then he'd go around, but he made every single kid in that room feel special. Like I remember one night he walked over to a kid and he goes, hey man, I got a big match tonight. Can I get some of that energy from you, brother? Can I rub your arms? And like, dude, you could just see these kids just like blossom like a flower in sunlight. And I thought that is pretty fucking cool. That somebody at this stature has an easy out. The handler can get him right out of here. And instead he's making each one of those kids. My understanding is that Cena does the same kind of stuff. And you see like he just gave $500,000 to the firefighters out in California. For somebody that puts their money where their mouth is, to me that's a double thumbs up, cool. And kudos to him for it. And I'm happy to see him making the transition into movies, so that he's segueing out of his wrestling career, much like Dwayne did. So anybody that has the time to do that and put their money where their mouth is gets double thumbs up from me.
And you're one of the all-time greats. Is there any favorite match of yours that stands out?
Like just in general, or of my career?
Of your career.
People always ask me like my favorite opponent, and I've been blessed to have worked with so many amazing wrestlers and both up and down the card. I guess for me, like the first time in ECW Arena, the first 45-minute Broadway with Terry Funk, was special because it was the first time I'd ever wrestled Terry. I'd always been a huge fan of the Funks, and I had grown up not really being able to see them because they were in the NWA, and where I lived, we only got the WWF before cable came in. So when I started breaking into the business and got a chance to see Terry and see how special he was on a night-to-night basis, and now here I am working with him in a decent position. It wasn't just, hey, go and let Terry Funk beat you up. I remember thinking to myself at first, like, what, because he walked into the building that day and he was almost like crippled up. I said to Paul, is he going to be able to go 45 minutes? Well, about 30 seconds into the match, I was like ready to yell for my mom to come help me. He was, beating the snot out of me. But to me, it was such a, I'd been in the ring with big stars before that, but, to be in with Terry Funk, who I consider one of the all-time great single wrestlers, it was just sort of, there was like a surreal point to it. Like, holy shit, I'm in the ring with fucking Terry Funk, It's just a pretty cool thing to experience. That one stands out, but I've had so many in my career that stand out because I wrestling Buddy Roberts back in UWF. This is towards the tail end of his career. He was still wrestling for years beyond that, but towards the tail end of like when the Bad Street USA and the Freebirds were running rampant. All those things stand out in my mind because, these were the guys that, Mick Foley and I used to talk with Dominic's gym. Like, man, we'll never be able to be on TV. We're nowhere near as good as those guys, and then finally get the chance to do it and work with and learn from those guys. I honestly still stand in awe of the business. I'm in awe of the guys like Funk that can make it look so easy. Like I always ask people, I don't know of many professional athletes, say a professional football player or baseball player, that could remember lines and carrying out a storyline. I also don't know many actors that could go in and hit all the physicality side of it. So to me, wrestlers find someplace, even though the acting community doesn't give it any respect, the pro athletics, some do, but by and large, as institutions, they look down on professional wrestling. When in reality, I think professional wrestlers are some of the greatest actors, athletes on the planet, especially the ones who go back and watch a Harley Race match. Amazing, just amazing. And to have been on the card with those guys and traveled with them and learned with them and wrestled many of them, to me, I look back and it's been one hell of a ride, and I wish I could start it all over again.
And I wasn't going to ask you this, but since you bring him up, any thoughts on Harley Race since he just passed away?
Yeah, I saw him at WrestleCon 2 years ago in New Orleans. And we were waiting because the way the hotel was, you couldn't just park. You had to wait for your car to come pick you up. So we're out front of the hotel, and I looked, there were a lot of fans and stuff milling around, and I look over and I see Harley up there in a wheelchair. So I walked over just to keep people from bugging him and talking to him. So I started talking to him, and I always loved talking to Harley anyway. And I said, "How you doing, Harley?" And he said, "Well," and he smacked the chair and he goes, "I'm in this damn thing." And I said, "Well, it could be worse." I said, look at it. He said, with what you've put your body through all these years, I said, it could be a lot worse. And but I remember what struck me when I was talking to him was the life was gone in his eyes. Like he was just empty. He was there, but he wasn't there, And because anybody that knew Harley knew he was like very much a character, and was always trying to zap you with his zap, the what do you call it, the taser. He was always up to something, like a little gremlin almost. And to see that gone from him, just sort of, it was sad to me to see that, because to me, here's a guy who has electrified how many millions of fans over the years. The NWA champion back then, it wasn't like even today, like wrestling, like WWE or AEW or NXT. Back then, the NWA champion was literally working 7 days a week and flying all over the country. He might, like, say you're going to challenge for the belt tonight in Canada. Yeah. He might not have even ever met you or seen any of your matches, but he says to go out and have a NWA caliber world title match,
which doesn't happen today, by the way. I've tried to get Nick Aldis to come up to wrestle
Really?
us, but they refuse to respond. So it's AJ Styles they did when he was New Japan champion, but
Well, why though? I mean,
they don't want to do it like the old days, I guess.
but that's crazy because you're trying to establish your brand, and especially it's supposed to be a world title. I would think you'd want it to be in Canada and America and Mexico and wherever else you could get the thing to be. But again, what would I know about wrestling, right?
Well, I do want to ask one last question, but it's for my own knowledge, because you do know a little something about being a heel. What's the best advice you could give young wrestlers out there about being a heel?
Live the character. And that sounds sort of cliche, I guess. I'll give you an example, I guess, rather than try to verbalize it. When we had the Terry Funk banquet, Francine and I were up in the room. We were getting dressed and getting ready. And I looked at myself in the mirror in the tuxedo and I thought, Shane, the franchise character would never in a million years pay respect to somebody else and go to somebody else's banquet. He would be sitting there wondering, why the hell am I not up there? And so I thought about it, and before I ever called Funk, I called Paul first. And I said, I don't think the franchise character would show up there, do you? He goes, why not? And I explained it to him. I said, the franchise is, he believes that he should be on the days, not the other way around. He would never go pay respect, especially the guy he's angled with. And there was dead silence on the phone for saying, you're right, you can't be there. Clear it with Funk. So I called Terry and Vicky answered. And I ran the idea by him and he did the same thing. He thought about it for a second. He goes, well, goddamn, Shane, you're right. The franchise can't be there. And I knew as soon as he said it to me that it was right. Now, I took heat from that. Taz and Perry and a lot of the guys in the dressing room thought I was being a prick by not showing up. But live the character. You know, if you're going to, you can't sit there and go in and say, well, the franchise is supposed to be this nasty, asshole, big-headed piece of shit that believes his shit doesn't stink, and then go in and be nice to somebody. Now, that doesn't mean you want to, knock a kid down walking out of the building. How about just don't talk to anybody? Walk right past them. Because, arrogance doesn't always be, hey, fuck you, I'm better than you. Arrogance can sometimes be the way you carry yourself and the way you evoke. But to me, the funnest part of being a heel was getting a chance to push those parameters a little bit. As a babyface, you've got to, okay, I'm going to get it back here for you and hope the crowd comes with me and all that. I always thought it was much harder to be a babyface than a heel. More to learn being a heel, at least the way the business used to be, calling the match and having to get your opponent over and that sort of thing. But as a babyface, it's really hard to make somebody like you. It's pretty easy to make anybody hate you. At least I thought.
Well, I had somebody threaten to skin me alive today, saying that he's actually put two groups together, one in Toronto, one in Montreal, and they're going to kidnap me and skin me alive. So I'm not quite where you were.
Yeah, that's you get if that's supposed to be a wrestling angle, it's. Does anybody out there believe that somebody's going to really kidnap you and skin you alive?
That's just a random fan messaging me that.
Oh, so it's
which was an unusual one.
Yeah. You might want to carry some. Well, you Canadians don't believe in guns, right? You need to get yourself a good
Only the bad guys have guns in Canada.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's none of the good people.
So I know you're on Twitter because I follow you on Twitter. You wanted to let everyone know where we can follow you on social media.
Yeah, that's really the only one at the franchise SD. At the franchise SD. What I found out for me, Devin, was that with the social media, I still got a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old in college. On the road every weekend, and still working on several other things, including my book. I've got so many different things going on that the last thing in the world I have time to do is sit down and go on Instagram and then Facebook and Twitter and this and this and this and that. And to be honest with you, on a day-to-day basis, my life is so boring. I don't think anybody really cares that, hey, I'm getting ready to sit down and drink a Henry's, so let's take a picture and post it up on my social media. I just find it odd. To me, like the social medias are a great way to disseminate information. I'm going to be at Icons this weekend, or going to be whatever. I try very little to talk about my kids. If I do, it's just in generalities. I went through a long period where I didn't even want my kids identified, because of the franchise character, and there's a few out there that like Ric Flair, and like that. Not sure if you're going to skin you alive or not. So on the social media stuff, I find myself when I do get on there, and I apologize to everybody because when I first launched it, I was getting on there as much as I could and really, doing the best I could to get information out and answer everybody's questions and everything. But that, once you get to a certain number, that could become a 24-hour day job, because no sooner do you get them answered, and there's 1,000 more questions waiting for you. So I've been horrible at it lately, but I've pledged to get back on there and start answering. Right now I sort of use it more like the messaging. I'll get a bunch of messages from people and stuff through that. But it's I've been working. Just a little side note. I've been working on my resume. I think at 39 years old that I just hit within the last month or so. That it's time maybe for me to grow up and get a real job, and so I started putting my resume together. And
39 years in the business, you
yeah, something like that. No, 39 years old. Oh. But as I got done with it, you don't realize until you start you start culminating everything in one place like that on a resume, and you get done with it and go, damn, this is a pretty damn impressive resume. And so I've been started getting it circulating out there and stuff. I would love performing for the next 100 years if I could, but it's for me now with the kids getting to the point where they're my older son's right on the precipice of starting his life. My younger son's not far behind, and I think it's time. As I'm watching the business, it seems like it's grown less and less what I remember of the business, and I think that I hope anyway that somebody like the Cons, for instance, could see what opportunity they would have if they took it back. You're not going to take it back to 1985, but to pull some of the best of '85 up to 2019 and figure out a way to pull the fans back that have left. It's a massive audience of people that are sitting there waiting to do that. So.
Did they ever reach out to you at all yet? You've mentioned
I've never spoken to them, no. I spoke to Dean Malenko and Jerry Lynn when they were in the Pittsburgh show, which, by the way, had pictures sent to me recently, and really surprised because I did watch a few segments of that show because it's from Pittsburgh. And I had gotten a phone call from Dean and Jerry before the show asking if I wanted to meet up after the show. So I watched a couple segments and then took off heading towards Pittsburgh. They ended up getting tied up and we didn't hook up. But watching the show, it sounded like, the Peterson Event Center, I've been in there, a dozen times. It's a beautiful building. And it sounded like they had a really thick, stout crowd there. And then I started getting pictures sent to me from fans during the show going on. And the building was, from the pictures, 75% empty, 70% empty. Now, in a place like Pittsburgh is a wrestling town, much like Philadelphia, much like Chicago, much like Charlotte. If you can't draw a good, solid house in Pittsburgh, especially with a new upstart company that everybody's excited about, like AEW, then I think there should be some concern there because I think they ought to be able to fill a building like that. I think Peterson is like a 7,000-8,000 seat venue, but just again, like all these things are swirling in my head. You get online and you see something, so and so is trending or this topic is trending, and you see how, like in the AEW case, right? If any wrestling blog site you go to, everybody's talking about AEW, and then you see pictures from Chicago where the building is like that. You see the pictures from Pittsburgh, the building's, more empty than it is full. And, you have to start to wonder, is this something where, you get 1,000 people talking and something can trend pretty quickly? Because to me, with the money that they've invested so far there, they ought to darn well be able to fill up that type of a building, even without the additional star names yet. The star name should be the icing on the cake. So if you would have brought, say, like a CM Punk in, that should have just, jammed it. Now it makes it a must-see ticket. If I don't buy my ticket right now, it could sell out. So I better buy my ticket now. So, I mean, there's, AEW, they're not out of the game by a long shot. I mean, they've got a, great opportunity. But if they don't start to make some of the correct moves now on the business side of it, I fear a year from now we'll be talking about the company that used to be or the company that still is the same as it was last year. And neither is a good fit for AEW from a business point of view.
They used Taz, I think, as a guest commentator when they came to Philadelphia. Would you consider doing it if they were to ever return to Pittsburgh or another city like that?
Yeah. I'd say, look, I love the business. I love trying to help kids learn. I was blessed. I was in the business. And
Jim Ross also doesn't like you, though, does he?
No.
That might have something to do with it.
But that's okay. I don't. It's the people that don't like me, they don't like me because I've been outspoken.
Yeah.
And not one of them can point to me and say, well, he did this or did that to me. So I don't really give much concern or care about somebody liking me or not liking me.
No, but I was just saying because he's senior advisor, because in my opinion, a lot of people's opinion, you'd be an ideal agent at a place like that.
Yeah, well, and had the experience to do it, thank you. But again, that's where it's the same advice I gave Dixie Carter years ago. Be careful of bringing this person, or that person in, because all they'll want is your money, and they'll do nothing to make sure you make a return on that investment. And once that money's done or gone, and then they'll just move on to the next place. And which is exactly what those people, their names are irrelevant, but that's exactly what those people did. So Tony Khan should be asking himself, do these people have my money's best interest at heart, or are they just here taking care of their own paycheck and their own whims? Don't know. That's something he'd have to answer. But when you look around the business, there's a lot of people out there that have an incredible amount of experience in the very things that I think their roster needs. Now, would they convey it? Would they pick it up? Like I asked Arn this years ago when they came to Pittsburgh. The WWE came to Pittsburgh, and I took my son. It was the last Pittsburgh Civic Arena show, which is where my dad took me as a kid. So I took my son so he could see the same building. And afterwards, we all went out to eat. Excuse me, me, Arn, and Dean, and a couple other people, Jamie, and. I asked Arn, I said, I know how you teach because I learn from you. Why is it I'm not seeing any Arn Anderson in the kids that I'm watching here? And he said to me, he goes, they don't give a shit, Shane. They don't give a shit, and the company doesn't give a shit. And, well, I would dare say that WWE and AEW, two different things, because one's been an established brand for 40 years. The other's an upstart. It's one thing that Vince wants to disregard and overlook. But somebody like Tony Khan, who's investing a lot of family money into this and going to be investing more, he should be asking the very question, do the people I have here have my best interest at heart and the fans' best interest, the company's best interest, that dressing room's best interest at heart? If he believes that they are, then he should continue doing what he's doing.
And for people that want to book you for autograph appearances, and I think you still step into the ring here and there.
Occasionally, yeah. Shane, it's real simple. Shane Douglas Booking, no S at the end. Shane Douglas Booking at gmail.com.
Well, thanks again for doing this part 2. I'm sure there'll be a part 3 down the road.
I love it.
Your opinions are always good. We like to hear them. Any closing remarks for this interview today?
Yeah, I've said this online quite a bit after the first interview. You do your job properly, very well. Most people come in with the interview and they want to, either off cuff and ask you a couple general questions that you've already answered a million times. And then extrapolate down that line. You really not like Ric Flair and blah 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 blah. You always have great questions. I like the questions that make me think and rekindle things, and it's all back there. Maybe some cobwebs back there, but all the stories and the information's back there somewhere. The kind of questions you always come you guys can't see, but he's got a stack of papers here with questions on it. I like professionals that come to work prepared, whether it's in the ring or outside.
And I saved some of these questions for the next time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, brother.
It's always a pleasure learning from you as I hear your answers.
Appreciate it, man. And always catch it right here on Hannibal TV.